Peeps, we are back again. Back again, back again, back again, back again. And it's getting hot. It's getting hot out there. It is getting hot out there. Or, should I say, if you're in Europe, it's getting cold out there. It's getting ice cold. Drop a comment once you're in the chat. Drop a comment once you are in. Drop a comment once you're in. Drop a comment once you're in. What's up, Steve? My man. Drop a comment once you are in. Do I like BK? What's BK? Let's go, let's go. Let's go, gents, let's go. Apologize for the lateness. Family matters to attend to. Burger King. I don't have a glass of kombucha on me. I can actually crack a bottle in the basement. I've got some fennel tea right now. I had a bunch of kombucha earlier today. Kombucha is good stuff. It's good stuff. I have to admit, though, I prefer the store-bought stuff than the homemade. I guess you got to get really good at the homemade stuff to have it taste good. I don't think I like Burger King. I don't really eat fast food. I'll have McDonald's occasionally on a road trip. Ooh, homemade hibiscus mint. Interesting. If you guys are watching this, if you guys logged in here on Twitter, don't forget to like and retweet. Let's get the word out there. Let's get some traction. But yeah, we got some big news. Just gonna wait for a few more people to come in. Again, yeah, apologies for the tardiness. Family Matters. I was on an interview with Paul Publisher from my YouTube channel, and that ran long. And then I had late dinner. I hadn't seen my wife all day, so gotta get some quality time with the missus. I apologize, but gotta get some quality time. Luongo is a great follow. I think he's really, really on to something. Jeff, with your Merlot, with the box Merlot. We're getting there pretty soon. All right, guys. I'm just going to roll with it. So, we have the big news that everybody's talking about. But I don't think that people, myself included actually, when I first heard the news, realize is such a big escalation. And that is the destruction of Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. So there's been a lot of speculation about who did this, and I just want to go and state first and foremost that the one country that we can rule out doing this is Russia. And the reason for that, some people are trying to say that Russia did it, or at least, well, we don't know who did it. Okay. We know Russia didn't do it because Russia has nothing to gain from it. Russia, it's incongruent with the prior behavior of Russia. If Russia was trying to escalate it, Russia would have done things like this earlier in the game. But as it stands right now, what's happened is Russian-owned equipment, because remember, this is owned by Russia, and it costs an enormous amount of money, and it looks like now it's not even going to be salvageable. That's arguably what the situation is. Doesn't make logical sense. But Big Dick Anon is CIA. And that's the whole thing with these boards, is that they'll release a certain amount of legitimate information, but then they'll throw you in a completely different direction to serve their own purposes. Russia could have just turned off the taps. This was not only Russian property that was extremely expensive, but the gas pipeline was Russia's ability to gain leverage over Europe. So you saw just literally the day before this was blown up, you had big protests across Germany for them to reopen Nord Stream 2. Because, of course, the regular people in Europe, but particularly Germany, because this gas is really targeted towards Germany, were realizing that, wait a minute, this is actually really serious. Let's get the gas back online. Russia would like this, of course, because they want to, it's leverage for them. They want to be able to have economic leverage over Europe, and it would have been a lever for them to de-escalate NATO expansion. If they could peel Germany away, if they could destabilize domestic politics in Germany by saying, hey, look, we have gas for the public, it's your government that wants to keep it off, then that's not good for the European governments. So we know, if you have any brain, you know that Russia didn't do it. Especially because Russia's pretty pissed about it, and you can tell that they're pissed about it. Now, we've had some kind of weird stuff. So we have Radek Sikorski, who is former foreign minister for Poland, but he's a Davos guy. He's married to Anne Applebaum, who is a Ukrainian, I believe. Maybe that's not true. But at any rate, she's a massive anti-Russian writer, intellectual. They're way connected to the elite. And he put out a tweet that said, thank you, America. Thank you, U.S., which the current Polish government, which is, by the way, is a different party and they hate each other, started flipping out about that because, it was in many ways a kind of stupid statement, right? Because what it did was it essentially validated the Russian argument, which is that the Americans blew it up. Now, and yes, and as Jeff is saying right here, Biden said back in February that if Russia invaded Ukraine, Nord Stream 2 would be eliminated. And when they were asked about this, they said, well, like how are you going to do that? He said, we have ways of doing it. So, but here's the thing, and this is where Tom Luongo's insight comes in. I was trying to think about this myself, because what I was struggling with was why Sikorski made that statement. Why did Sikorski say we're shutting it? Like, why did he say that the U.S. Thank you, U.S. Why would he say that? Because what that does is that's a way that would make the European public pissed at the United States. So why would he say it? What would be the benefit of him saying that? And I think if you look at it through the lens that they're trying to push, that Rand paper was trying to push, which is that Europe is being subjugated by the U.S. And so there's this theory, this theory that the purpose of NATO is to keep the Russians out, the Germans down, and the Americans in. But what's interesting is that nobody on the sort of nationalist Trumpian right really likes NATO. Certainly doesn't like NATO expansion. Trump himself was basically threatening to leave NATO. And so that starts to beg the question, is NATO really an American project, or is America being used by something else? And this is one of those things, like you get into geopolitical commentary about the tail wagging the dog. This was used for a long time, particularly with the U.S.'s relationship to Israel, in that, is the U.S. using Israel or is Israel using the U.S.? And there was a lot of credible arguments that U.S. foreign policy, everything with the U.S. was being used for Israel's purposes. And I think actually what we're looking at is something similar, because you look at Europe. Europe doesn't have any military of its own. And so you could ask yourself, well, does that really benefit the U.S.? And you could say, okay, well, maybe in some sense because they're sort of subject to the U.S., they're servile, they can't defend themselves, so they need the U.S. On one hand, maybe that's true. On the other hand, you could say that the U.S. is paying for Europe's defense. And I'm not saying that you should dismiss one argument out of hand, but if you look at it through the lens that Davos is the cabal, right? The primary cabal, and that they've infiltrated the United States, that the U.S. is under belligerent occupation, for instance. If you view it through this lens, then what it looks like is that the European Davos's strategy would be to try to get U.S. to be the bad guy, to blame the U.S. rather than to have the blame fall on their shoulders, and to also have a conflict be between the U.S. and Russia without really involving Europe so much. Europe would have to be Europe's economically damaged, so Europe has to rebuild. This is one of what Tom's argument is, and I think it's really, really salient. I keep thinking about Sikorsky. Like, I'm sorry, but it's just not that, like, people aren't that stupid. I mean, they do a lot of stupid things, but someone like Sikorsky is not like some low level. For him to make a comment like that, it was designed to draw everyone's attention to the fact that the U.S. did something. Now, does that mean the U.S. didn't do it and that this is all a lie? I don't know if I would say that. But the question is, what part of the U.S. did it? Was this done by the Pentagon? Was this a military order? I don't know. I mean, it's true that the U.S. has submersibles able to do this sort of stuff, and we had, just prior to it, we did have submersibles in the area. We had an exercise in the area. So a lot of fingers are pointing towards that. There was also some flight trackers that were saying U.S. helicopters were in the area then. I don't know how relevant that is. This is a very, very deep pipeline. It would have to be essentially a submersible to do it. Some people point out divers. Divers can't go this deep. It's too far deep. It has to be a submersible. So all this stuff in mind, does it mean the U.S. military did it? Maybe. But it would be a faction of the U.S. military that would have carried this out. It would have been a cabal-aligned faction. My sense is that I would guess that it's more black ops. That would make more sense to me, that it would be black ops. Because what I see is I see the State Department and I see the CIA pushing this really hard line towards Russia, but I don't see the Pentagon doing the same thing. The threats that have been coming out of the U.S. right now, and by the way, this is important for people to hear because I don't think a lot of people understand it. The Western media is continually talking about how Russia, Putin was threatening to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine. That is completely and totally false. It's not true. You can go to the Russian website and you can read the transcript of the speech. It's fake news. It's fake news. I don't know how many more times, I don't know why people somehow believe this stuff off the bat. It's fake. That's not what he said. What he said is that if Russia is attacked, that if Russia is going to be, how do I put this? It was basically, if you are going to use those kind of weapons against us, we are able to respond in kind. We have nuclear weapons too, and we'll use them. It was basically saying, like, if you use nukes on us, we will respond. We will retaliate. And the response from the State Department has been to this ramping up of threats, which starts to make you wonder, are they planning on doing something themselves? Now, those of you who have been following this for a long time know the whole argument I've outlined that they do not control ballistic missile command. They do not have control of the nukes. The cabal does not have control of America's nukes. And that the way that Juan elucidates this is that when you get to some sort of nuclear threat level, that the computers, I think, essentially um, give very important information that would allow them to basically, I don't even know how to describe this. I don't know how to describe it, but the basic point is that you, neither side is going to have full control of the United States. They're not going to have access to the big guns completely until there is some sort of tripwire situation like what happened a few years ago with the false alarm in Hawaii. And that both SES and Strategic Missile Command are both trying to get complete control over the country, control over the nuclear arsenal. Both sides think they're going to get it in an event like this. So everything seems to be going according to plan to have some sort of standoff. I mean, we had the four regions. The four regions have now all joined Russia. I haven't heard the official announcement about their complete integration, but the results came in. You can believe them if you don't, if you don't want to, whatever, it doesn't matter. The results came in. And so that territory is now considered part of Russia by Russia. And so how is America going to respond to this stuff? What's going to play out? I mean, I'm not saying the war there is done. I don't think it is. But you can tell that things are getting ramped up because this prior strategy of take things slow, very gradual advance, the proxy war aspect of this is over. It's not a proxy war anymore. It's about to become total war. And the question is, how is that going to manifest? Is that going to manifest at a nuclear level? My contention is that it's not. I do not see that this is going to go nuclear because I don't believe the cabal has access to nuclear weapons. Is it possible that we will see a nuclear device exploded? I think it's possible we might see one as a demonstration in some neutral area, like over an ocean. Right now, so this is a good way to segue into something. So I tweeted out a few days ago, I've deleted the tweet since, trying to ascertain what was going on in China. And the initial reports were that Xi had been arrested. Now, what was confusing about that was that we also had reports that were confirmed that many of Xi's enemies had been arrested. But there's also military movement all across China. So what it seems like happened was not that Xi was arrested, but that there started to be an opposite response. But the question is, well, why would that response happen right after Xi came back into the country? And why was Xi nowhere to be found? And I think that the logical inference that you can draw here is that there was an attempted coup against Xi that failed. And so he was put in a protected area. And that right now what you're seeing happen in China is some level of purges. And this corresponds with some other things that we were seeing, like that there was a really big push. The Pope was trying to push the meet with Xi. There was the World Economic Forum was really making a push to work with China because they were, I think, had this last-ditch effort, this hope that they could peel away China from Russia, or they could at least make China neutral. Really, it's not about being neutral, favoring them, not working with Russia. And China would have nothing to do with them. And so right after those meetings were rejected by Xi, then you had this whole situation go down. And right now, the Russian and Chinese Pacific Fleet, from what I understand, are moving further north. By the way, another related thing that I heard, I can't confirm one way or another if this is true, but that there were some issues with Algerian gas to France. Is that a true thing? Can anyone confirm that? Does anybody know? Has anybody heard? Even if any of you guys right now, can you just Google, was there some sort of issue with Algerian gas to France? Go ahead and Google that. I'll check the comments real quick because I wanna bring something up. Is there something wrong with the pipeline from Algeria to France? Jeff, it is true the World Economic Forum once scorched earth nuclear war to eliminate a huge percentage of the world population. Yep, and also they are they're losing, and so since they're losing, they are trying to flip the board over. That's my perspective. I think that their idea is that we're gonna have this. This is our plan, and the world's options are either they go along with our plan, or well, we destroy the world anyway, which is close enough to our plan. So it really is the edge of a knife. I don't think people understand just how bad it is. It's like you're either going to be slaves or you're going to be dead based on these people. Did any of you guys check that? All it takes is a quick Google search. Quick Google search. Is there any issues with France and Algerian gas? Even just like headlines you see come up. And just drop it real quick in the chat before I go into this because this is because what I heard was that a week ago Russia cut the pipeline to Algeria from France. But I didn't see any news of that either. I don't know if it was done secretly or if seems like it would not be something that would not be done secretly. I don't know. So we don't know if that's true or not. But what we do know is true is that 2 days, I think it was 2 days before the Nord Stream pipeline was cut, a new pipeline from Norway to Poland was established. And by the way, I just make a point. The Poles don't seem particularly unhappy with this whole situation because it seems like the Poles have really aligned themselves with the neocons. I think because the neocons have a particular anti-Russian fervor and also an anti-German fervor. So I think that the neocons really love the Poles right now. I think the Poles and Ukrainians and the neocons are really connected to each other. So anyway, that's the stuff that's happening. And meanwhile, we're also seeing increasing movements from the Justice Department, increasing statements about Trump. And we, that all the evidence they had is legitimate. And now you have Trump canceled his speech on the 8th of October. I'm wondering if that's when we're going to see the Trump arrest. Because I think as we get into October, things are going to happen like one after another, after another, after another. I mean, it's already started to be like that the end of September now. But I think it's going to be just a massive crescendo through the whole month. Juan's of the opinion that we're going to start to see some 25th Amendment stuff. I don't know about that, but what I will say is we had Biden today addressing somebody who was dead for years in the audience. And, is this stuff just designed to start to seed a narrative? Because we know that a lot of times it's not Biden actually going out and doing things in these locations, right? We know that it's not because we've seen the different Bidens. And I'm not talking about a clone. He's not a clone. It's a mask. And if you've seen Mission Impossible, you know that they're very, very lifelike masks that you can wear. They engage with the person's face. There's even voice modulation devices with it. It's not difficult to do. It's used very often for doubles. So I was thinking to myself, why did they? Was that being put out there to seed what comes next? We're gonna see. But guys, I see it. I see all this stuff accelerating very, very soon. Very, very soon. It's imminent. It's imminent because if we are moving towards a nuclear standoff, and it looks like we are, the United States and all these European countries, right after Nord Stream 1 was destroyed, which by the way is arguably considered to be an act of war. It's a, these are sovereign assets, right? It's the equivalent of if Russia sank a U.S. cargo ship at sea. Like it is a very, very, it's a serious escalation. It's a serious, serious escalation. So where does that put us? Where does that put us? If we're getting to nuclear standoff, then we're getting to the end game. When we're going to find out, everybody in this audience is going to find out if the whole idea of Cheyenne Mountain being locked up tight as a drum, if Cheyenne Mountain is actually going to make a move. Do they have the capacity to make a move? Are they going to win? We're going to find out, because if we get to a nuclear exchange or a standoff, let's just say a standoff, and it gets to the point and there's nothing happens, I think we can start to say to ourselves, maybe that was all fake. But I don't know about you guys. I don't feel like it's fake. I really don't feel like it's fake. You just know it's there. There's so many signals. You have Trump going out there constantly referencing Q stuff. Constantly. It's all over the place now. And Jeff, you're totally right about that with the economics, and we can touch on that briefly right now too. I mean, you see the pound falling drastically because you have, nonsense. And by the way, I will say this: this is the one area I'm not so convinced about is Tom's analysis of the United Kingdom. I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm just saying that some of the arguments there are a bit less persuasive and seems a little bit like grasping at times. Like the differences, like Liz Truss and her objectives versus Rishi Sunak. I mean, I don't honestly see much of any difference at all. And maybe it's because we're talking about, factions that are 90% aligned and really subtle stuff. I just want to throw that out there. I wasn't really impressed. I don't want to say I wasn't impressed. That's not the right word. I'm very impressed by Tom's stuff. I wasn't persuaded by it. It seemed just like getting almost a little like overthinking, because I don't see what Rishi Sunak would have done differently than Liz Truss. Just seems like window dressing. They're cutting taxes and raising spending when your currency is losing value internationally. I mean, they're heading for a depression. But what would any of the other people have done? I don't think it would have been any different. Let me just see some of these chats here. Do Malone, the mainstream discourse is all about what country did it, U.S., Russia. What they don't understand is that there are multiple factions within the U.S., CIA branch of the military, and also global groups. My feeling is that this was the deep state cabal trying to gin up World War III as a distraction. They were losing power and desperate. Do Malone, I'm 100% in agreement with you. 100% in agreement. Right now, every country has so many different factions at play. The only country that seems consolidated is Russia, which is another thing that, like, Juan made some comment in one of his recent videos that Russia had all these deep state connections as well. And I'm just sorry, I don't find it persuasive anymore. He didn't go into it. You have to know where people straight out of their subject area. When I listen to Juan talk about Russia, I can tell he doesn't really have a deep clue about what's going on because he's getting all sorts of details wrong. And this is one of those things, like, I know that situation very, very well because I follow it in detail. And so I know that Juan's being a little lazy, saying the Russians rescued the IAEA at this nuclear facility. The way that he was saying it was like this facility was not already in Russian control and that they were simply defending it against the Ukrainian attack. It wasn't that the Russians came in and rescued people at this nuclear plant. He also focuses on the biolabs, but didn't even mention the referenda and what's actually going on in Russia. There's a lot of variables to the Ukraine war. Biolabs are definitely part of it, but I make this point just because, does Russia have its own deep state? I mean, you can make this kind of argument like it's a security state. Yeah, for sure it's a security state. Was his point simply that Putin doesn't make all of the decisions in Russia unilaterally, that there's people behind him? I would agree with that entirely, no question. I mean, Putin's a front man for the Sivlaki, but he's also not a puppet. He's just first among many. And who knows, maybe there is somebody in the back who kind of gives him a few orders too. But it's not globalist. I'll tell you that much. It's not globalist. At any rate, the financial situation is definitely accelerating on a rapid pace, and I think it's all coming to a head. I think that we are seeing the nuclear standoff in October. I think we're seeing the financial collapse in October. All of it just prior to the elections. And I don't know if it's going to happen just before the election, this action, or if it's going to happen after. Juan seems to think it happens on the 29th of October. I'm more of the opinion maybe that it happens afterwards, because I feel like, well, it depends. If there's an announcement about them delaying the election, then that might be sufficient. But the people have to see that the same thing's going to happen in 2022. It's my perspective. Andy Dookie, yeah. 2 years of these chats, man. Exactly, Jeff. We are already in a recession. It's depression that's next. Steve, ECB desperately trying to save government debt, seems very much in desperation stages. Well, this is one of the things that's really interesting, and again, I think Tom does a really good job of elucidating this. People are like, well, why would Europe want to collapse itself? But the reason is because they want to not only wipe out the middle class in Europe, especially Germany, which has the real middle class, but they need everybody to go bankrupt, and they need the ECB to take on all that bad debt, and then they need to basically have this debt jubilee. But at this point, everything is owned by them. So all the small businesses are taken down. Everything can be centralized. This actually reminds me, though, of something else I wanted to mention. I can't believe I almost forgot about it. We had big elections on Saturday in Italy. And we had Meloni, Giorgina Meloni, or Giulia Meloni. I don't remember her first name. It starts with a G. She won. Her broader coalition, which included Salvini and Berlusconi, won big in Italy. They didn't get a super majority, but they got a really solid majority. And Meloni was really active against COVID, and she's been very patriotic. But what happened? I mean, she was saying the usual, we're with you, Zelensky, and now she's supporting the Green Pass across the European Union. So I don't know at this point what the situation is. There's a couple different things that could be going on. The first thing that could be going on is that she was just a plant the entire time, just a fraud and false awakening stuff. I don't necessarily buy that one. Seems kind of incongruent with what I've seen about her behavior in the past. The next option is that she was co-opted. So she wasn't that way before, and then she's turned. And I think this is a little bit more plausible, although I wouldn't say it like 100%, because what I think is going on is more what I'm going to say next, which is number 3, which is that Italy is in a really tough place. So the thing to understand about the European Union is it's kind of like a death cult, especially if you're in the euro. Because right now the European Central Bank, because Italy is on the euro, they're able to exert a ton of economic leverage on Italy, especially because Italy has all sorts of issues with their bonds. So as long as, it's not like Italy's Hungary. Hungary has its own currency. People don't maybe realize that. Hungary does not have the euro. It has its own currency. The reason that Poland and Hungary never got on the euro was in many ways due to fear about this. Now, that doesn't mean that their currencies are not highly correlated with the euro, but they are separate currencies. And so you could float the currency. I mean, tying it to another currency is a temporary thing. You can always untie it. But if you actually do all business in a certain currency that you don't control, then you're in big trouble. That's what Italy has as a problem. And so you have this new nationalist Italian government, that is trying to figure out what they can do in a European Union that demands total obedience. And so you had Italy, you also had Sweden, by the way, the Sweden Democrats, which is also a right, I don't want to say far right because it's a fucking bullshit term, but, they are a party that is on the right. And they're facing sort of similar problems. How much are you able to negotiate your dynamic away from the European Union before you get smashed and crushed? And so what they try to do is they try to do these little negotiations, like, okay, well, we'll be with you for this. We won't block you on this. And I don't think, the Duran mentioned this, but I don't personally think that works. I agree with them. I don't think it works. I don't think the European Union, the Eurocrats who want to control the world, I don't think that they're okay with Meloni, ostensibly supporting them, but then trying to chart a different direction with immigration, or trying to chart a different direction and whatever, this way or that way. I just don't really think that there's a good deal. Look at Poland. Poland is like so gung-ho about this war. And they've been, as aligned as maybe you could ever be, right, with the European government, at least with the war, which is the big thing. But European governments still cut funds to them. You just can't win unless you're totally captured. So I think that that's probably what Meloni is doing, which I think is a bad strategy. And if she continues with it, she'll probably lose. Remember, Meloni has no government experience. She's got no government experience. The only person who really is experienced in her cabinet is Berlusconi. And he's got a big personality. Let's see here. Do Malone, there are many secret society groups and not all of them are negative, maybe more positively oriented ones in Russia, or at least ones that are Russia first. Well, it's funny you say that, dude, because Cliff High has talked about that Putin was brought up in basically like an Orthodox Christian version of that. And if you want to go back actually into the esoterica, Russia has been at war with the Khazarian mafia for centuries. That's why they targeted Russia for destruction with the revolution. And that goes all the way back to the Russians' destruction of Khazaria, which is in Ukraine, all the way back in, and I guess it would be what, the 800s or something like that? Maybe not quite that early, because that would have been prior to Russia. I don't remember the exact dates, but I think Khazaria was in like the 11, 12, or 1300s, around that time period. And it spanned from basically Ukraine and southern Russia. So, and Russia destroyed them. And the Khazarians, of course, just for people who don't know, they are their own group that Cliff High talks about them as this sort of like name stealers. And Cliff kind of really goes out there on a limb with this stuff. I don't think he's wrong necessarily. I just say he really goes out there on a limb. But the Khazarians, converted to Judaism in order to maintain neutrality between the Christians and the Muslims in the area. And this is where a lot of the negative stuff about Jews come from, but Jews controlling stuff. It's really, this group. At any rate, if you want to go down this lore, if you want to talk about this stuff, that there's always been an issue between the Khazarians and between Russia. And then that goes to all sorts of stuff like anti-Semitism in Russia, and the Russian Empire, and then the Bolsheviks being, the Bolshevik intelligentsia being majority Jewish, and you get down this whole thing. I am not really much of a person from my studies of this. I just view it, I'm not trying to be, PC here or anything, but I really am not persuaded by the whole, like, Jews are in charge of everything stuff. I think it's this group that have infiltrated every single country, and certain groups were more captured than others, and I do think that the Jews were very captured at the upper level by the Khazarians. But, I mean, this is stuff that the regular mass of that population have no idea about. And, as I've talked about in COVID cabals a long time ago, were sacrificed, right? They were sacrificed with the Holocaust, etc., for the aims of this Khazarian group. So, I mean, if they're willing to sacrifice 6 million Jews, I don't think we're talking about them collectively in this case. So, at any rate, yes, I think it's plausible that Putin is part of one of these societies. Although it's interesting to sort of see a lot of Putin's early life. Russians with Attitude did a really good biography, which I'm still going through the later years of, but in the early years of Putin, Putin's grandfather was Stalin's chef. It's interesting, little bits of lore. But then the family was removed from the whole thing. And I don't remember exactly what happened, but basically the family lived in St. Petersburg, then the revolution happened, and then they went back to their hometown in Tver. And so the grandfather stayed with Stalin, but the family was not there, and the family was in Tver. Nevertheless, you have to think that there may be some, there were some ties to Russian elite society that existed. Some ties to the underground between his family and who knows. See what else here. Bank of England has essentially collapsed. They started printing more fiat money to prevent it, but that's a done deal. Yep, Jeff, it's exactly right. So we're going to start to see the money printer go off the rails. Meanwhile, we have Powell over here in the States who is raising rates and causing this collapse. So trying to get all the capital to flow into the U.S. away from Europe. It is really, when you start to look at the money, a lot of stuff makes sense. Is it, it's not really about the war, it's about the money. The war is downstream of the money. Like, you can look to a certain extent at even the big war against the cabal right now and how much it has to do with trying to get control of the money. Not just like the ability to print the money, but actually being able to get like the money from the population. And I think what the cabals realize is that while they've hammered the middle class badly, they've weakened the middle class, they haven't been able to fully take it from the middle class. Because, I mean, even right now, the middle class still holds more wealth than the elite. So you got to find some way to destroy that. And I think that's where they came up with this great reset plan, the destruction of the pipelines in Germany, cutting off the gas, just doing everything they can to deindustrialize. And yeah, as Jeff, as a lot of you guys have said in here, it is going to be so much more painful for those who are unprepared than, I mean, it's going to be really bad. If you're in Europe, I mean, seriously, brace yourself, because you are likely to see, if you're likely to see 40 to 50% of all businesses collapse around you. I mean, I don't even know if it was that bad during the Great Depression. I don't know. Kluv, it's great to have you here. I'm glad you're enjoying it. Let's see here. Doom Alone. People like Ben Fuffled talk about how there are various different secret societies in Asia that have significant power and influence. They aren't necessarily the good guys, but they definitely are not aligned with the cabal. and maybe working together to move humanity into a new era. Yeah, this is exactly what I agree with you do completely. And this is, I think this the big issue in the truth community is monolithic thinking, and that's why I think Tom Wong goes a breath of fresh air, because you realize that these factions, it's very difficult to get the factions to all work together, because there's always the more you centralize even evil organizations, the fewer winners there are. So if you have a bunch of mafiosas who control various areas of the country, they might work together to take money from some other place, take power from some other place, but they also don't want one group to get too powerful, because then that threatens them. And I think a lot of people who are following this stuff, they don't like to think in that way, because it starts to get very complicated and starts to get very hazy. That, for instance, you have the Rockefellers and you have the Rothschilds, they work together. But then you look at it and you say, well, if Obama was backed by the Rothschilds and if Clinton was backed by the Rockefellers, well, did you see the two of them work together all the time? No. I mean, what you saw in the 2008 primaries was the Rothschilds breaking the Rockefellers. And so you can say, well, they're both evil, but the Rockefellers are much more aligned with the neocons than the Rothschilds, which are aligned with Davos, the World Economic Forum. I mean, the entire Obama sector of the U.S. government, the neoliberals, those are all Davos people. Whereas the neocons are more the Rockefeller people. So, I mean, when you have to look at these things in a factional lens. Like, in some ways they would work together for a while, but does that mean that they're always going to work together? What if the landscape on the ground changes? China was very happy to work with the cabal, because what was the cabal doing? It was weakening their big geopolitical rival, the United States, and it was moving all sorts of capital and economic power towards China. Okay, so is China supposed to say, no, we're not going to do that because we don't agree with your plan to depopulate the world? No, they fucking smiled and said, yeah, we're with you for sure. Let's keep doing this. And then it gets to a certain point, though, where they're like, okay, now China, we need you to, start killing people. We need you to I don't know. We need you to launch a nuke against Russia. We need you to do it. They start to then demand things that are like, okay, we're not going to do that. And I think that the cabal thought that they were using China, but China was using the cabal. China was happy to line their pockets and help them to do all their plans, because what these things were doing were weakening other countries around them, other rivals. It wasn't doing anything to weaken them. But the second that they're saying, okay, now you have to deindustrialize, they're like, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. Sorry. And so, yeah, I think a lot of them are starting to work together. And that's why when we talk about these factions, they aren't necessarily all good. I personally think China is a piece of shit. I think that the CCP is scum. And I'm not, when I hear people like Gonzalo Lira or like Brian Berletic, who are people who I like their material and I respect them, but when I hear them get a little too much slob in the knob of China, I'm like, guys, don't forget, this country is not it's a great power, but do you want to live in China? I don't want to live in China. Do you actually think that they have everybody's best interest at heart? And also, do you actually think that they are as effective as, China is, I'm not saying China is very powerful, and China has, I do believe that they could take down U.S. carrier fleets, but China is not a tightly run ship. when it comes to stuff in military. Their military is very untested. I think that they'll suffer severe casualties. Now they have an industrial base they can build back. I'm not underestimating them, but I also think that there's this tendency to like see, well, the Chinese are, you know, just way, way, way more powerful than the U.S. And I'm not really convinced about that. I look at Russia and I see a different story. Not that Russia is more powerful than the U.S., but Russia has a very, very well-trained, experienced military. Um, it's Russia is a much more tightly run ship because it has to be. It's not a super populous country. It's 140 million people. Less than half the size, about half the size of the U.S., a tenth of the size of China. They have to make do with different kind of resources that they're dealing. You know, they don't have the industrial base. All this said, I mean, and I think that Russia also has a lot stronger leadership. And while I wouldn't go so far as to say that Russia is, you know, the land of the free and the home of the brave, I certainly don't think Russia is less free than where we are right now in the West. There's certain lines you can't cross there, fine, but it's the same thing here. I mean, it's the same thing in Europe, at least. The U.S. still has some degree of constitutional protection, so you can maybe say that U.S. is more free than Russia. Maybe you can say that, but you can't say that in Europe. Let me see here. Let's see here. I'll have to check out Puller. Do Malone, if you can send me some stuff about him, I want to take a look at it. Yeah, exactly. Like the Rothschilds are Khazarian, Zionist. Exactly. They have a different agenda. Let me see here. Channeled sources of info take with grains of salt all seem to be saying that the ET-ED dimension of the control system has been removed from Earth by our ET friends and the white hat military. All that is left are the human cabal minions without any support from higher ups and without most weapons tech underground bases. That's why the narrative is increasingly desperate. They're at the end of their rope. I've heard similar stuff, and I have to say it resonates, especially if you start to look at the stuff with Stargate. And what I have to say is that the stuff with Stargate is really just coming together so much. So you have Q, you have MJ12, which talked so much about Stargate. You watch Stargate, and you start to see the connection with ETs and their control over humans with the Goa'uld. You also see the reptilian connection with them. Also the connection to the Egyptians, the Anunnaki, going all the way back to the, to origins. But what's just unbelievably fascinating and just really difficult to set aside is that Stargate takes place at Cheyenne Mountain. And it's dealing with this very, very high level, very, very, almost breakaway civilization sort of technology. And you had Trump close up Cheyenne Mountain. So you have this whole thing where, like, if we're talking about the white hat military, we're talking about this faction, this section of the military. And what's also interesting about that show is that U.S. and Russia both worked very closely together. I mean, I had some little rivalries at first, but they ended up working very closely together on the Stargate program. They were very, very aligned with each other. And so actually with the other countries, when they had to start to disclose some of it, the other countries, China, UK, France, were really pissed off because they didn't have access to this stuff. And U.S. and Russia were working together basically to you guys are not at the level of consciousness development or maturity to be able to handle these programs. And there's a lot of geopolitical tension around it. And I can't help but see very, very similar stuff going on right now. I mean, there seems to be some kind of guidance going on. And if and when we see this white hat action in the States, I think we're going to have real confirmation of it. Because I have to say that a lot of the stuff that the Russians are doing, it almost does seem guided by some higher intelligence. So we'll see. We'll see how it plays out. 2030 agenda is getting closer and they won't win. The 2030s are going to be a new global multipolar structure. How I see things playing out is that we do have some military action by year's end, and maybe we're under military government. I mean, Juan made a really good point, a really good way of looking at this, which is that if they arrest Trump, Trump gets put on house arrest, let's say he can't do speeches, that allows also this military faction to take action without directly implicating Trump. And this is something that Q-Post talked about. Like, POTUS is completely insulated. You know, optics, he can't be seen to be involved in any of this stuff. So does that mean we have about a year of military control before we're able to get elections back on? You know, Juan's saying he doesn't see Trump back till spring of 2024. Well, we're early 2024. You know, honestly, I could see the same thing. But it doesn't mean that we're going to be under Biden in the meantime. And that's going to be a really different, I mean, God knows. God knows. But at least a lot of us are going to have to stop waiting. We're going crazy over here. It seems like within the next month and a half, we're going to have clarity. Let's see here. At the end of the day, America is still the shining city on the hill. Fuck China. Yeah, China's going to have to go through its own transition. And some of the stuff that we see here with Xi, there's arguments that Xi is actually trying to take China away from the CCP. I don't know. I don't know about this one way or another. I don't know about it one way or another. China has a long way to go. It has a long way to go to be an example to the world. I'm not saying it shouldn't get respect as a great power. I don't support harassing it in Taiwan. I don't support trying to put our troops on its doorstep. I respect its sphere of influence, but it is not a beacon. It's not a beacon. A country that goes and scoops people up and takes their organs is not a beacon. And I'm sorry. I mean, I'm willing to keep an open mind, but from everything I've seen, that is credible information. It's not propaganda. It's credible that China does this stuff to its ethnic minorities. Just kind of inconceivable stuff. Yeah, the brainwashing is also very substantial there. Yep, and they are in a big financial trouble. I mean, it's funny because a lot of times people are saying, "Oh, well, Russia's looking to China for help," but I actually see Russia has a very clear, like, they have clarity of focus, and it almost looks like China is looking more to Russia than vice versa. I mean, they certainly do need each other, um, but it almost seems like China needs Russia more than Russia needs China. Because technically, if it had to go this way, Russia could go into autarky. I mean, there are a few things that Russia doesn't make on its own, but could. It might take them some time, but they could. Russia seems like the only country that could go into some sort of autarky situation that could put itself into a siege position. Of course, you'd have constant infiltrators, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's not a good plan, And that's not the plan that they took. It's a plan that Cabal wanted them to take. I'm just saying you could see it. You could see a possibility of it, potentially. Anyway, kind of a pointless conversation because it's not happening. I have not heard of the attempt of making Ukraine greater Israel. I have not heard that. Let me see here. ET or fallen angel is very often the same thing, right? I mean, from what the more you kind of go down the ET rabbit hole, you start to find out that they're really extra dimensional. Now, I'm not convinced that that doesn't mean that they aren't extraterrestrial as well, but for people to understand this, an extra dimensional creature is coming from, they're not going to be on like on another planet in the way that we would perceive it here. They come through wormholes, gateways. Apparently, Earth is a gateway. It's a big airport, and so these entities feed on humans because they actually can't exist in this dimension. But they want the energy that we create. They want our souls, and so they are extra dimensionals. And a lot of the alien extraterrestrial things that we see here are really just kind of avatars that these extra dimensional entities use, which you could say that they are demons or angels. So I think when it comes down to it, you start to see them all very, very much overlapping. But it's opaque, and we don't have full awareness of that yet. We don't know about this yet. So the Stargate shows to watch. You don't have to watch any of them. SG1 is the only one that's relevant. The others are not disclosure. It's just Stargate SG1. Stargate Atlantis is okay. It maybe has a little bit of disclosure in it, but not the core stuff. The other one, I don't remember what it is. It's Stargate Universe is just dog shit. It's total dog shit. SG1 is where it's at. SG1. And by the way, if you watch it, you watch the early ones, it's just like so wholesome. I'm like, oh my God, it's just so not modern television. Because it was filmed in like the early 2000s. And I'd forgotten just how much scripting changed over the years. You can see by the end of the show, it's a little bit more modern. But in the very beginning seasons, you're like, I mean, it didn't bother me. It's just, it's very PG. All right. Jeff, really good point. We in the USA are so used to a peaceful revolution every 4 years. Martial law is going to be a huge shock to our system. No doubt. No doubt. Well, let's see here. Well, guys, I think that's good for tonight. We've got more stuff coming down the pipeline, so we'll be in touch soon. Appreciate you all, and I'll see you next time.